He goes, so he sits in his chair and he says, so Jay, what seems to be the problem with your attitude? I'm just like this. I go, I got no attitude problem, sir. And the guy launched himself across his desk at me. And he's like, well, what the fuck is this? Da, 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 da. He's yelling at me. And I thought he was going to grab me. I really thought he was going to lay hands. And he says, get the fuck out of my office. If I ever see you again, you're done. My name is Jay Kopelman. I served in the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Marine Corps. I was in the Navy from 1985 when I went to Aviation Officer Candidate School until 1992 when I did an inter-service transfer to the Marine Corps. Yeah, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania originally. Grew up in a suburb of Pittsburgh called Mount Lebanon and had a, what would appear to most people to be maybe a somewhat privileged upbringing. My father was a businessman. My mom was a housewife for most of my life growing up. She eventually started her own business, selling stationery, fine gifts, engraved invitations, that kind of thing. But I grew up in a house with two brothers, and my parents, they were married my entire life until my father passed back in 2009. People's lives externally, typically, you don't really see everything that's going on the inside. And if from the outside, I'm sure that people would be maybe jealous now even of what we had. We had a nice home, had the circular drive in the front, nicely landscaped, all the nice things. We went on some nice family vacations. My parents would send us to camp for 2 months in the summer. So went to a great school. It was a school district that wasn't part of Pittsburgh Public Schools. And so like our high school had an AstroTurf football field in 1975. We had a planetarium in our school. There was a whole wing of the school dedicated to the fine arts. We had about 3,000 students. So it was a really great community. It was very safe. On our street, we had the chief of police lived about halfway up the street from us. And then right at the top of the street was the local head of the mafia. So really safe street, nothing was gonna happen there. It was the kind of community, kids were outside all the time playing. You got home when it got dark. My mother used to have a cowbell even that she would ring for us when it was time for dinner kind of thing. So it was, by all accounts, it was great growing up there. I think it's important to know that not everybody's upbringing is idyllic, right? And so my parents fought a lot. There was always a lot of arguing. When we were kids, we'd kind of wonder, like, why don't they just get a divorce and separate? And I know that for some years later, right before he died, my father apparently told my middle brother that they stayed married. He stayed married to my mother for us kids, which isn't always the best thing. So there was definitely some childhood trauma, not just them fighting all the time. Some really bad stuff that goes on that people don't like to talk about, but that we know it happens. My youngest brother used to get beat quite a bit, pretty badly, until he one day had enough of it and, jacked my mother up against the wall and told her if she ever laid a hand on him again like that, he was gonna kill her. Stuff my mother did to me that it's probably best not spoken about. Definitely some trauma, but it's the kind of thing you block out for long, long periods of time until you are in a place to recognize it and understand that that's part of your makeup and who you are. Yeah. I never had any designs on joining the military. It was not something I had ever thought of growing up, really. other than playing war, right, as a kid. And in fact, my parents, after Bobby Kennedy got shot and killed, my parents took away all our toy guns. We weren't allowed to have guns anymore. When we went to camp in the summers, there was riflery. We had these 22 rifles there, and they would tell us we weren't allowed to shoot rifles. And of course, I didn't abide by that. I shot the rifles anyway, because I'm not going to be the kid that's sitting there telling the counselor, my parents said I can't. So, yeah, I never thought about the military as a job or a career. After college, I was, teaching high school and coaching high school football. I was an assistant coach, not a head coach, in Tampa, Florida. And I just thought there's got to be something more. When I was, 24 years old, I looked like I was 17, and I was getting into some trouble. Well, not trouble really, but getting called to the principal's office as a teacher. And the principal's son had played baseball at the University of Miami, where I was a walk-on the football team. And so, I knew who his mom was. She knew who I was. And she'd say, Jay, I hear that you're dating the students. I said, no, Mrs. Shields, I'm definitely not dating the students. But apparently some of the girls in the school were going around saying they had gone out on dates with me. And I looked like a kid. So I figured there's got to be something else. And I decided to go down to the recruiters and see what's up with that. Figured, let's just give this a try, see what it's like. Maybe it'll be fun. And went to the Marine Corps recruiter. I wanted to fly, and they weren't taking pilots at the time. They had an abundance of pilots, and so I went to the Navy, and the Navy said, yeah, sure. So you had to do a bunch of tests, like the ASVAB, and I don't know if it was called the ASVAB that I had to take, but I also had to take a test on spatial perception to see if I could understand what it would look like flying an airplane. They had pictures of airplane out of the cockpit at different angles and different pitches, up, down, left, right. And so I had to take that test, and I passed all their tests, and a little bit later got a letter saying, yep, you've been accepted, and this is when you're going to start. So I went to Aviation Officer Candidate School in Pensacola in October of 1985. So finished there in February of '86. We had 2 breaks while I was there. It was the weirdest thing. They took time off for Thanksgiving, and then like 2 weeks for Christmas. So AOCS was a fun time. It was that whole Richard Gere officer and a gentleman thing. Really interesting, a lot of fun at times. It was definitely challenging, and like nothing I had ever done before, being rushed around to do things, and you don't know why. And eventually you figure out, okay, there's a reason for all this. And sometimes it hits you pretty quickly, and sometimes it's years later down the road when you figure out, oh, that's why they were doing this. But it was good. We had a great drill instructor. These guys were all Marine Corps drill instructors off the drill fields at either Parris Island or MCRD San Diego. Very, very knowledgeable, super squared away guys that you really admired them. As much as they were kicking your ass and making your life as miserable as they possibly could, there was also a deep sense of respect and admiration for them and what they did, and ultimately what they did for us. Very funny guys. All these drill instructors were hilarious dudes. My drill instructor could smoke a cigarette, stomp it out, and then just stomp our asses on a run. Just smoke us all. There was another guy, big, strong Marine, poster Marine. And toward the end, you become a class candidate officer. So you're the guys who are kind of running it. And we were getting ready one night for some kind of dressy event, and I'm having to put on my Navy dress blues, and all of a sudden Gunnery Sergeant Holtree bursts in our room, and they're not supposed to do that. They were supposed to knock at this point. And It was like a week before graduation, and he busts down the door, and I had one of these old school Walkman things, right? And I'm listening to it, and Gunnery Sergeant Holtree comes in and goes, "Candidate, what is that?" I said, "Sir, this candidate is listening to a Walkman. Would you care to listen to it?" He said, "No, would the candidate care to suck my dick?" So it was just kind of funny stuff like that happened all the time. And it was a great experience. So get through that. But while I was there, I was really attracted to the discipline and the bearing of the Marines. And I had tried originally to go into the Marine Corps, and so something was just kind of bugging me the whole time that I was in the Navy, that this maybe isn't where I belong. But get through that, go through flight school down in Corpus Christi, Texas, through primary flight training. I selected for jets out of primary and went to Beeville, Texas to learn how to fly jets in the Navy. It's the same aviation program that Marine pilots go through. We all go through together. Flew with both Navy pilots and Marine Corps pilots, instructors during my time, and even an international exchange pilot. Got through the intermediate jet pipeline, went to the ship to carrier qual, and I laid a goose egg. I disqualified at the carrier the first time through. They brought us back and said, "Okay, you're going to go again, but right now the Navy has a big push for E2 and C2 pilots. So instead of getting 6 landings on the carrier, you're going to do 10. And then you're going to go back to Corpus Christi, fly twin engine props, learn how to be a multi-engine pilot, and then you're going to get your wings to go to the fleet." So never got to fulfill my track of flying jets, but that's life, and it's what you make with it when the chips don't fall your way. That's kind of going to determine how things are going to go for you the rest of the way. So got out of there, got my wings in September of 1987, and during that time I had a period in intermediate jets where I flew sick. I shouldn't have done that. I had a sinus infection, and during a penetration descent on an instrument flight, I had to ask the instructor pilot to level off and level out the pressurization in the cockpit of the airplane, because my nose just started bleeding. I had a lot of pain, took off my oxygen mask. It was full of blood, and I ended up being grounded for 6 months because I pretty much ruptured something. And so that delayed me getting my wings by about 6 months. Finally got my wings, went back to Florida for a month before I went to Norfolk to learn how to fly the E2 and the C2. So the E2 is the Navy's carrier onboard warning system aircraft. So it's a twin engine turboprop with a radar dish on top. And so they can go up, they can find where enemy ships, enemy planes are, they can direct fighters or attack aircraft onto enemy targets. And then the C2 is the cargo variant of that. So it's essentially flying a plane load of rubber dog shit out of Hong Kong, right? But so the mission is taking supplies, mail, VIPs out to aircraft carriers. Typically, you don't spend any time out there. The mission is all shore to ship and back, which was pretty nice because deployments and that thing meant you went to like Roosevelt Roads in Puerto Rico for a couple of weeks, or you'd go to Corpus Christi for a couple of weeks. Or Jacksonville. It was all good times. It was easy flying, a lot of fun. You're still getting your carrier landings, so I ended up with 100 carrier landings, and that was going fine. But then I heard about an opportunity to do an inter-service transfer to the Marine Corps. And there also might be an opportunity to transition out of, multi-engine into jets. So I applied for this opportunity. It was a long process, and ultimately what you have to do is you got to be in Washington, D.C., going back and forth from headquarters Marine Corps to Chief of Naval Operations offices in D.C., getting them to agree simultaneously for the Navy to let you go and for the Marine Corps to accept you. So I got all that done. This was in probably January of 1992, and got commissioned into the Marine Corps in February of 1992. So I woke up that morning, I was a Navy lieutenant, and by 3 p.m. I was a Marine Corps captain. It was awesome. My father came to Norfolk to help pin my bars on me. He had been a corpsman in World War II. Some pretty funny stories from that. When they were on ship, he had access to beakers and tubing and all kinds of stuff. So they built a still in their berthing spaces on the ship. And essentially all they were doing was drinking alcohol, rubbing alcohol that they filtered through cotton balls. And, it was horrible. He said he got so drunk one night that he pissed on his bunkmate. So he came up for that. It was awesome. I spent about 6 months in Norfolk learning to become a Marine. They had different senior officers assigned to teaching me the ropes, a couple junior guys who I still know to this day. So I worked there at what was then Fleet Marine Force Atlantic, and now it's just MAR 4 Lant. ALD, Aviation Logistics Division. I worked for, there were like 3 lieutenant colonels there. We had a reserve major who came in. B-8 was my first introduction to Anglico. So he had been a CH-46 pilot. He was a frog guy, but he had done an Anglico tour, and I thought that sounded really interesting. It sounds like it could be a lot of fun someday. And they sent me down to Cherry Point, let me fly the simulator. The head of this unit at MAR 4 Lant was a Harrier guy, so he got me into the Harrier community. I flew the simulator down there. I got to fly this 2-stick Harrier with instructor pilots from VMAT 203, and spent some time there just learning to be a Marine. One of the things I had to do was write a biography for the H&S CO, who was a colonel, I think. And so I write this thing, and I started out just like this. So there I was flying a plane load of rubber dog shit out of Hong Kong. Next day, I'm in this guy's office being read the riot act. So that was kind of how I started out my career as a Marine. And, it's not surprising given some of the shit I got into in the Navy as an officer, getting in fights. And there was one point where they wanted to take my wings. They boarded me, put me through 2 boards, put me in hack. So essentially officer restriction, locked into a room on base at the bachelor officer quarters for 30 days. It was at a big party thing we had done at Dam Neck in Virginia Beach. So it's this outdoor officers club on the beach there, and I got all drunk, and another guy got drunk, and it didn't end as well for either of us as we might have hoped. But yeah, he ended up with a broken nose and 10 stitches, and I ended up in 30 days of hack and almost having my wings taken. So as I was going through this, I said, you know what? I'm done with this shit. I don't want to be here. You don't want me here. How about you just give me a contract to go to Buds, and I'll go to Buds. I'll be out of your hair. I'll get to go with war fighters, and I don't need to put up with this bullshit anymore. So it got approved really fast. Like, I've never seen anything in the military get approved so fast. They were just so happy to be rid of me. But then an admiral has the final say. So after the second board, the first board voted 5-0 against me. They were going to take my wings and who knows, make me go hand out basketballs in Adak, Alaska or some shit. So go to his office after the second board that found 3-2 in favor. After all these guys who had come in and badmouthed me, then they changed their tune in the second board. It was really bizarre. But do this and go see this admiral, and I'm told, hey, you're good, don't get your powder wet. So I get brought into his office, and I didn't see that in a corner was his chief of staff or somebody, right? And, you know, another pretty senior Navy guy. And, yeah, I think I was a Lieutenant JG at the time, so like a first lieutenant. And he's a nice guy, Fred Lewis, calls me into his office, and his call sign was Bad Fred. He was a big guy, like 6'3", and, you know, he's big hands and everything. And he says, hey, Jay, I'm Fred Lewis. Good to meet you. We shake hands, and I'm like, this is pretty cool. So he's like, have a seat. So I sit down. I'm kind of just sitting there like this in his office, right? Not seated at attention or anything. And he goes, so he sits in his chair and he says, so Jay, what seems to be the problem with your attitude? And just like this, I go, I got no attitude problem, sir. And the guy launched himself across his desk at me. And he's like, well, what the fuck is this? Da, 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 da. He's yelling at me. And I thought he was going to grab me. I really thought he was going to lay hands. And he says, get the fuck out of my office. If I ever see you again, you're done. And that was it. He overturned me going to Buds. Never had, you know, that opportunity. Went back, flew for a few years, then did my inter-service transfer. I ended up flying C-2s, and there was a guy in my squadron, in my fleet squadron, he came in after me, Gabe Gomez, who did end up doing that. He left flying, he put in a package, he got selected for Buds, he went down, he became a SEAL. So, wow. Yeah, he gave it up. And I met some years later when I was working down in Coronado at Naval Amphibious Base. I was an instructor down there, so I taught at the TACP school, and I was a Hearst master and MCIWS. So for lunchtime PT, I'd often go across the street and just go run the Buds obstacle course. And I was over there one day, I met a guy who had been a Marine Corps F-4 pilot. Then he inter-service transferred to the Navy and became a SEAL. So I'm a Marine Combat Instructor of Water Survival. So all the Marines who are watching this or listening to this, I'm that guy you hated that would try to drown you twice a year during your swim quals. So I thought it was a lot of fun. You know, here I am, I was a Marine Corps major at this point. So I was by far the senior person in the class. And, you know, it's run by staff sergeants and gunnies, and it was just a lot of fun. You know, you run around in UDT shorts most of the time, a lot of pool work, a lot of pool PT, a lot of time in your, you know, in your full kit in the pool, people trying to drown you. But it was a lot of fun. I was a strong swimmer. I could swim before I could walk, so, you know, it really wasn't that big a deal to me. The test to get accepted to the course, if I remember correctly, we had to swim 500 meters in under 12 minutes, something ridiculous. It was a lot of time. And then I think it was a 50-meter side stroke holding a 5 or 10 pound training brick out of the water, and then 5 minutes, I think, of treading, holding that same training brick. So you're treading with just your feet. I didn't think any of that was too terribly challenging. There are people that don't pass that, right? That just aren't that comfortable in the water. But I thought it was a fun course. A lot of times with your hands tied behind your back, having to swim 50 meters, or, you do a 50-meter underwater swim. And of course, the challenge with that is you don't get to dive into the pool and then go. You're in the pool, you push off from the side, and you have to swim 50 meters underwater. Well, of course, you get people with shallow water blackouts, and then everybody's got to get out of the pool while they pull this person out and, resuscitate them essentially and make them do it again. But you get bound, seated with your legs crossed and your hands and feet are, you're tied up at your ankles. They throw you off the 10-meter platform into the pool, and it just seemed like a fun time. Beat working for a living, that's for sure. And we used to do these things. You'd just be in, your boots, your utes, and a helmet, and then you and a swim buddy would have to swim. So across the pool was like 25 meters. So you'd be holding on, one guy in front, one guy in back. So the front guy is swimming with his hands because the guy in back is holding the other dude's ankles. And so the guy in back is then kicking. And you have to go back and forth doing that a bunch of times. And then a bunch of bobbing up and down and, just, dead man float, that kind of stuff. So it was just, I loved it. It was fun. And the last evolution, of course, is you're in full kit and you got to go out and do like a 200-meter open ocean rescue. So, which was fine. I think it was summertime in San Diego when I did it. So we were out in Coronado, just swimming out past the breakers, grab a guy, bring him back. And they never sent me to the basic school, which is where all Marine officers after their officer candidate school go. It's a 6-month school to essentially learn how to be a Marine officer. And so I didn't do that, but they sent me to a school called Amphibious Warfare School in Quantico. And it's about a 9-month school. You learn a lot of tactics and strategy, study, Sun Tzu, von Clausewitz, all that stuff. They say it's like for the top captains, and in the Marine Corps get to go to that every year. And really, what we used to say is, well, it's the top captains who happen to be up for orders and are, aren't quite ready to PCS somewhere, so they send us there, to go kill 9 months. But met some really great people there. Our class advisor was just an outstanding Marine. He retired as the CO of 3rd Marine Regiment out in Hawaii. Guys who went on to become generals from all MOSs too. So you had an opportunity to learn about all the different MOSs. So, they had different phases of this school, and at one point, everybody in what was called your FACAD, and I couldn't tell you what it stands for, but it's all the pilots in one group, all the grunts in another, and then logisticians in another. And you would have some trip somewhere, like I think we went to Boeing facility in Philadelphia and saw, went to the plant where they're making CH-47s, the Chinooks. Yeah. So did that kind of stuff. We did some battlefield studies. We went to Gettysburg, went to Antietam. It was all really cool stuff. Learned quite a lot there. And then after that, I got sent to Cherry Point to learn how to fly the C-130.
Oh, wow.
The aircraft they assigned me to, the Marine Corps said, nope, you're not going jets. You're multi-engine. You're staying multi-engine. And so went down there, went through the RAG to learn how to fly the C-130. Did that, got orders out to the West Coast, to El Toro, and came out to California in, I guess, September '93. So got out here, was stationed at El Toro. The interesting thing with the C-130 community is it's very incestuous, and me not having been a Marine from day one, I was this kind of orphaned that was having to be adopted places. And so I wasn't a Marine, I wasn't a C-130 pilot, and so I wasn't received very well. So they sent me right away over to MAG 11, Marine Aircraft Group 11, and I worked in the ops shop over there, so the S3. I had a great boss there who was a Hornet guy. I was the only C-130 guy there. I ran the flight program for all the F-18 squadrons and the C-130 squadron at El Toro. And he said, hey, make yourself available to learn how to fly the F-18. So I got to fly two-stick Hornets with the RAG with VMFA T-101 at Cherry Point, at El Toro. While I was there, though, I was like, man, this isn't really any fun either. So I decided to put in for orders, and I called DC and I requested orders to Anglico. So while I was at the group, I'd had a couple of knee surgeries. So I playing football in college, I'd torn my knee up the first time and then had a couple other incidents, and finally my ACL tore all the way. So I had to have an ACL reconstruction while I was at MAG 11. And they said, oh, it's gonna be, so this was like August of '94. And they said, oh, it's gonna be 6 months before you return fit for full duty. So I just busted my ass in physical therapy. I was going there every day. It was essentially my job to go to physical therapy for a while. And I went 5 days a week, and they said, oh, it's gonna be 6 months before you can run 3 miles. So within 1 month, I was already running 3 miles again. And within 3 months, I was out of physical therapy, returned fit for full duty, and I went to Anglico. I still wasn't like 100%, so getting to Anglico, and I was not winning any runs. I was never very fast to begin with. I was, my best PFT was maybe a 19-minute 3 mile, so I wasn't a speedster. But Anglico is Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Company, and the officers in the unit are typically pilots or artillery officers. The enlisted come from the artillery community, communicators, logisticians, S1 admin, so a full mix there, but the teams are typically made up of a pilot who's the team leader, an artillery officer who's the assistant team leader, and then you've got 10 or so enlisted guys who are communicators and typically artillery background. So you can deploy anywhere in the world to support allies or U.S. forces that don't have those capabilities. So we were jump qualled, did all the Hearst stuff, went to go to Benning for jump school for basic airborne course, and then come back, and then in the Marine Corps you get your gold jump wings after, I think it's 10 jumps, 5 jumps of a certain kind. You don't just get to put on the gold jump wings after basic airborne course. Yeah, I went to Anglico, was still kind of recovering from the knee thing, but I had also used my time in physical therapy to get fit. Like I would leave there just drenched in sweat. Slowly working my way up to Anglico standards when I first got there. But by the time I went to jump school, I was in jump school within that 6 months when they said I'd be returned fit for full duty. And by that point, I was really fit and doing just fine, getting like a 295 or 296 on the PFT all the time, just because I couldn't run. But yeah, I get to jump school. It was a joke. It's 1 week of training crammed into 3 weeks, but I had a really good time there. The instructors there are called Black Hats, and I was in Delta Company, which is supposed to be the tough company there. There was a Marine Corps major from 2nd Recon Battalion, I think, who was the senior officer. He was the senior ranking officer. And then me, I was the most senior captain there. And we had a couple other captains. There was an Air Force captain who was a shitbag. And then we're in there in this big auditorium. They put you in there, and the class leader, this Marine major, he just looks at me and he goes, "You got it." And he walked out. And so now I'm running the class, and this guy, he stayed in jump school. He went through the whole thing, but he took no responsibility for anything. So we go through the whole thing. It's, it's going really well. It's a lot of fun. My black hat was a great guy. He was a fisherman, had a bass boat. We would talk about that stuff. During different training evolutions, I'd see him standing there. I'd just walk up to him, get up behind him without him knowing I was there. I'd start whispering the Marine Corps hymn in his ear. And then he'd be having me just bang out push-ups like nobody's business. But it was fun. There was a lot of respect. And this Air Force captain didn't have any respect for the black hats. He would treat them like shit. And so finally, I just got tired of it one day. I talked to him, and then I went and talked to my company commander, and I told my company commander what was going on. And this will make me sound like a dick, but they kicked him out of jump school. Yeah, they sent him back. I mean, the guy couldn't do 2 pull-ups. It was ridiculous, and like my company, at the end of training every day, I'd make us all run to the pull-up bars and do pull-ups. And it wasn't a lot. It was like 10 pull-ups or something, right? But this guy, he couldn't do anything. He just had a bad attitude. He didn't belong there. So toward the end of the whole thing, my black hat, Sergeant Bell, he says, "Yeah, I want to put you in for honor grad." I was like, "Okay, that's cool." So, they give you all this Army knowledge that you have to learn because you go to a board and they do it in a trailer. So, in the Army, they salute indoors, uncovered. So Marines don't. And I walk in, present myself to the board. Yeah, Captain Kopelman reporting to the board as ordered, stand at attention, my cover's off, and they're waiting for me to salute them. I said, "I'm sorry, but Marines don't salute indoors uncovered." And go through the board, get everything perfect. They didn't say anything. So at the end, this major ends up getting honor grad. And apparently it's because I didn't salute them, and he did. Yeah. So the guy who walked out on the class didn't want to have responsibility as the class leader, and then goes ahead and salutes indoors uncovered. He got honor grad because he saluted. I felt it was more important to uphold the standards of the Marine Corps than, maybe it's a life lesson in, learning other people's cultures and going along to get along kind of thing. But, I was kind of brash and just,
you were a Marine.
I was gonna be a Marine. I'd go back to Anglico. I got assigned a team, and we went to Okinawa. We got attached to the 31st MU over there. So while we were there, it's just a lot of time to PT my team and get them some good training. Did some jumps. We did some close air support and artillery calls for fire. While we were there, toward the end of that time, we had the radio battalion guys. A bunch of them hadn't got their gold jump wings yet. So I had a jump master on my team, and we took them out, did a night jump with them so they could get their gold jump wings. And then this is 95. So we get back to our spaces. Everybody comes back in, and we, of course, do a gold wing ceremony for them. But, this was quite some time ago. And so there was the full hazing, thing with guys getting their blood wings and drinking beer out of their Kevlar helmets, and it was a good time. So when I was at Anglico, we were on deployment, and I had to do my fit rep before we went on deployment. So the XO was my reporting senior, and went in for my meeting with him to discuss my fitness report. He said, yeah, this is what I'm putting down. I'm going to rank you I'm going to rank you 1 on your fitness report, and we'll send you a copy. So, we're gone for a few months and I haven't got a copy of it yet. So I called back to the S1 at Camp Pendleton, and I asked, hey, do you guys have my fitness report? And they're like, oh yeah, we got it. I said, can you grab it and tell me what it says? So they're going over, and I said, well, where'd I get ranked? You're at the bottom. So now I'm pissed, right? Like, this guy lied to me, told me one thing, did something completely different. And so when we got back, I went and talked to him about it. And I told him, I said, I'm going to go talk to the CO about this because you lied to me. So I went in, I made an appointment with the CO. I requested office hours and went in, talked to him, told him what happened. And he said, look, I'm really sorry that happened. I can make him rewrite it, and you can appeal it to the BCNR, the Board for Correction of Naval Records. So he made him rewrite it, but he still ranked me horribly. And he said, look, this is wrong, so I'm going to fix it the way I know how. And that guy never got promoted again. So the major who wrote my fitness report, so the CO couldn't tolerate that kind of thing. He could not tolerate lying, and wrote him a horrible fitness report for that, just for that. It was horrible. The guy never got promoted again, and his brother had gone on to become CO of 1st Recon Battalion here at Camp Pendleton. Had a great career, and this guy's career ended. But my career on active duty pretty much ended as well, because I ended up getting passed over for major on active duty, got out of the Marine Corps in January of '97, went into civilian life and ended up working for the U.S. Attorney in San Diego, who at the time was a guy named Alan Burson. We were doing counter-drug missions based out of El Centro. So I would get like Army National Guard teams or Marines and set up OPs, observation posts and listening posts, LPs, out in the Eastern Desert looking for drug and human traffickers coming across illegally through the desert. And I would also go out with U.S. Forest Service guys, so patrolling different areas of the mountains out in East County, San Diego, looking for human traffickers bringing people across illegally. We would interdict them, grab them. One night we had driven up one of the mountains, and there was like a cattle gate across that was locked, so you couldn't go any further up that road. As we were coming down the road, we see a U-Haul truck going up the road. I was like, okay, this can't be good. So we turn around, we called in some support, we start following them up, and they hit that cattle gate. They had nowhere else to go. And all of a sudden, the back of this U-Haul opened up, and there were hundreds of people came out of this thing. So I started chasing them. And shortly before this had happened, a Border Patrol agent had been chasing a bunch of illegals coming over, and he got hit in the head with a rock. And I don't think he died, but he was really fucked up. So we're chasing him. We apprehend as many as we can. And you're running through manzanilla bushes, and you're getting all torn up, your clothes, your skin, trying to grab these folks and bring them back. And so that was a real interesting time. But then one of my teams one night got jacklighted on their OP by a DEA helicopter. And, you know, it puts these guys in a real compromised position where now the smugglers know they're there, and they could end up getting engaged by smugglers, by drug traffickers. So I sent an email to the head of the DEA in San Diego, and made a bunch of comments about him, how he looked more like Tony Montana than DEA. And so now I'm in trouble with the DEA. They're out after me. So I stuck around there for a little while, but I was told you should be strapped all the time. And so eventually left that, went back on active duty for a while down in Coronado at NAB as an instructor, and then ended up going back to civilian life, working for a startup, an internet startup. They had a ton of capital. These guys had sold, they started and then sold shopping.com. It was one of the first really big .com things. Did that for a couple of years, and then ended up working in the securities business at Smith Barney for a couple of years. Started there in '99. So on September 11th, I was in the offices in Irvine, and one of my colleagues there was a bond trader, and Fred had a couple of TVs in his office, and it's like, 5:30 in the morning or something. Market opens at 6:30 in California, so you got to be there early. And I hear Fred screaming, and I'm like, what the fuck is going on? So I got down to his office just in time to see the second plane hit the towers. And I was like, oh shit, we're going to war. And so I was at 3rd Anglico in Long Beach at the time, but I didn't know what was going to happen, like how fast units would get called up. So when I was at 3rd Anglico, I had a team that I had taken over to Jordan to support the 11th MEU for some exercises they were doing. So we fly over, and I had this whole trip planned out for these guys. We were gonna go over to Jordan, and then I had met some girl from France, and I was gonna take these guys to Paris afterward, and this gal was gonna be our tour guide and take us all over Paris and show us around. Well, we landed in Amman at Queen Alia International Airport, and the CO and the XO from the MEU are there to meet us. And the XO and the OPSO, and they said, you guys, the exercise is canceled. You're going to spend a night, and you're going to get on a plane tomorrow and fly back to the States. So we spend one night in Amman in some hotel, and apparently what had happened was this was Osama bin Laden making threats against U.S. forces in the Middle East and targeting the amphibious ready group that the 11th MEU was a part of. So they decided to hightail it instead of sticking around and doing their exercises. They got out of there. The ARG did, the Navy made this decision. So yeah, there was no exercise for us. Got on planes, came back. And then, of course, 9/11 happens. And I remembered I had contact information for the XO at the 11th MEU. So he's now the OPSO at the 11th MEU. So I got in touch with him. I said, hey, if you guys are going to deploy and you need anybody, I'm available. So within a month or so, I had active duty orders to the 11th MEU. I worked in the 3 shop there. We did workups for a Westpac, did a Westpac with them. We came back in December of '02. And then in February of '03, the MEU CO somehow finagles a way for us to get sent over to support the Iraq invasion. So we ended up in Kuwait for a little bit. And then the invasion kicked off, and then we went into Iraq. we ended up in a couple places. At one point, they wanted to give I mean, we're a MU headquarters, so this is not a warfighting outfit, right? But they figured that these young officers and the enlisted needed an opportunity to go out and run patrols. And we're like, this is not a good idea here. You know, nobody's really trained for this here. I don't think we maybe had a couple infantry guys. You know, I was the only Anglico guy. And so we're like, yeah, not a good idea. So one other officer and I, another lieutenant colonel, I was a lieutenant colonel at this point. I'd been promoted during our deployment. We said, no, we're not going to go out on these, because they wanted us to go out just not to run the patrols, just to be there as like adult supervision. And we said, no, I'm not going to participate in that, because if something happens, if somebody gets an itchy trigger, you know, civilians could die unnecessarily, and don't want that responsibility. We don't think this is a good idea and you shouldn't do it. Well, they did it anyway, and fortunately nothing happened. But came back from that, and I heard about an opportunity at 1MEF to go over there as the Special Forces Liaison officer, working out of the G3. So I went over there, talked to the G3. He's like, yeah, if you want the job, it's yours. So had to go eventually down to CENTCOM, go down to SOCCENT, get read in a skiff, to all these orders and operations that were taking place, and then had to be introduced to the various special ops organizations that were running things in Iraq. So as that turned out, it's Special Missions Unit out of Fort Bragg was leading all that. So I ended up going down there for a day, spending a day with them, getting read in their skiff, meeting their leadership, getting shown around, and ended up at one point later on, I can tell you about working with them in Iraq. So while I was doing this job for a long time, I would just be sent like to the Middle East on my own, right? I would go over there, fly into Bahrain, then fly out to MU to help deconflict operations in the Marine AO with these other Special Forces units. Come back, did quite a bit of that in Bahrain. There's always a SEAL det there. So I'd get read in on what they were doing, and then I'd have to fly out to MU and make sure that we were deconflicting Marine Corps operations with these special missions that were taking place all around Iraq or wherever they were going on. So it was just providing that input and that insight to make sure that there were no blue on blue incidents. Yeah. And just to make sure that everybody knew what the other side was doing. At one point, it was, being on the 11th MU as a senior guy, now we have 2 lieutenant colonels in the 3 shop, right? So, but while I was still a major, we did split ARG ops at one point for contingency reasons. And so I get cross-decked to one of the small boys. We go into Aqaba, Jordan, and then I get sent into Amman to work out of the embassy for a month. So I got to live at the Intercontinental Hotel in Amman and work out of the embassy, which was great. It was a great time. I had a fixer in Amman, this Jordanian guy, Mohammed, great guy. At one point, I start getting phone calls in my room, like hang-ups, and then I find out that I'm being targeted. So I said to Mohammed, I go, hey man, I need some guns. So he's like, yeah, sure. He goes, tomorrow you'll go with, I forget the other guy that worked with him, what his name was. You go with him, he'll take you, get you taken care of. So next day, get in a car, go to a garage, right? Like a service station, pull in, they close the doors. Guy comes in literally with a greasy paper sack. Open it up, and there's like 6 guns in there. I'm like, all right, this is good stuff. So it was like $500. I get 6 guns and get the hell out of there. But now I'm carrying around a gun and I'm on Jordan all the time, and had a lot of fun doing that kind of stuff. Just kind of running around doing singleton shit and just, doing my thing, which was good for me. It's, of course, having great dinners every night at the Intercontinental Hotel. My fixer was hosting dinner every night. Whatever Marines would be around, we'd all be invited and smoking Cuban cigars, and it was a lot of fun. So in 2004, 1MEF went over, took over in Fallujah. And so I went over, I got assigned to go over to train the Iraqi Special Forces at Camp Fallujah. So the Iraqi Special Forces were so special, they were called the Specialized Special Forces. And it was, every one of these guys had been a colonel in Saddam Hussein's Special Forces. Every single one. It didn't matter if he was 20 years old or 50 years old, right? That's the story. So we're training these guys, getting them ready, and then they start planning for Operation Phantom Fury, which was going to be the second battle of Fallujah, right? So we're going to go in, get rid of all the insurgents in the city, make it safe again for people to live there. So while that's happening, the 1MEF chief of staff calls me aside and he's like, hey, Jay, we want you to take one of the Iraqi army battalions into Fallujah, and you'll link up with 1-3, and then 1-3 will mentor them in combat operations in Fallujah. I'm like, roger that. Sounds like a good deal to me. So get assigned to do that, get pulled off of working with the Iraqi Special Forces. And really, with them, it was a lot of basics, like just going to the range kind of stuff, teach them how to handle their weapons, how to maneuver and shoot. It was a lot of really basic stuff that, you should already know. Some FID, which is Foreign Internal Defense, teaching them some of that. But then I get assigned to this Iraqi Army battalion. So they sent 2 battalions to Camp Fallujah. And in the meantime, they'd been building this camp to house them all prior to the invasion. So it's just these big GP tents that we're going to live in. They've got the bulldozers in there, and they built up berms. It wasn't a very secure camp at all. It was outside the wire, so it was adjacent to Camp Fallujah. So finally they roll in, and turns out that these battalions don't like each other at all. So we had to keep them in separate areas the whole time. And then on their way in, the battalion I had been attacked. So they lost some guys on the way in. They're scared shitless. I go over to meet the battalion commander, and I'm talking to him and his leadership. And we were near a small building, like concrete building, cinder blocks or something. And all of a sudden you hear that whistling of incoming, like mortars. And I said, no, I think that's outgoing. I think we're okay. And no sooner did I say that than the first round impacts just outside the berm, not 50 meters from where we are. And I was like, maybe it's incoming. Well, these guys scattered, right? They just went running for whatever hard structure they could find. I was like, oh, this isn't going to be good. This is not going to be good at all. So that night, we put some of the Iraqi soldiers on watch at different posts around the camp. And middle of the night, we start hearing AKs going off. Like, just, you hear a pop, then another pop, then pretty soon it's pop, 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 pop. And get up, go running out, you know, agaf, agaf, telling them to stop in Arabic, and try to investigate, okay, what's going on here? We saw something. Well, what did you see? Well, apparently these guys had fallen asleep, and then they woke up startled and start shooting, and then you get sympathetic firing from the next post over. Pretty soon you got 4 posts, and they're all firing inward. So the rounds are coming into the camp from these Iraqi soldiers on their posts, and in the morning, we woke up and the GP tent has holes in it. Yeah, so we could have all been shot during the night. Disaster averted, get ready, having a couple more days there, and we get the order to roll into Fallujah. So we're gonna stage though, just outside of Fallujah in a staging area. The night before we're gonna move to that position, we wake up the next morning and we see uniforms just scattered all over the place. Like 100 to 200 of these guys had deserted in the middle of the night, just left and went home. So now we have a much smaller force to take into Fallujah. So we go to the staging area that day, get set up there, and that night they do the prep of the battlefield. So, you know, I have my nods and I'm looking up, I'm watching the AC-130 flying around, seeing the fast movers, the helos, everybody firing into Fallujah. By this point, we told all the civilians to leave, that we were coming. So it was the craziest thing. The AC-130 had this massive IR spotlight that they could shine down, and then you could watch it firing the 105 millimeter howitzer out of the AC-130 down into the city. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. It was the craziest thing. Like, there's no way anything is living down there by the time we go in. So the next day, we got to lead the Iraqis into Fallujah, and we're on foot. So I had grabbed like some Marines from Camp Fallujah, went around, found some volunteers to go in with me and be part of this team. I had one of the Marines from the CG's personal security detail from his PSD went with me. We ended up getting a Humvee, but we walked into the city. So we walked across the railroad tracks into the city. I mean, these Iraqi soldiers, you could just see the fear in their eye. They're waving their AKs all over the place. There was no weapons discipline, nothing. It was nuts. You know, kind of scary from my standpoint, in that I was more worried about getting shot by an Iraqi soldier who was scared to death than I was about being shot by an insurgent. So we finally link up with 1-3. I get to their command post. They had taken over a house in the city. And it's, you know, it's all firmed up. You know, we got sandbags up through all the windows, have good fighting positions staked out. You did have to leave that. There was no running water in the house anymore. So toilets don't work, nothing. So they had brought in some shitters and porta shitters that were outside the wall. So to go use the head, you had to go outside the wall and then go to one of these porta shitters. So you had to get kitted up every time you went outside. You know, you don't know if you're going to be sitting there taking a dump and get blown up or shot or something, or on the way. So that, you know, get them in there. We assign the different Iraqis to different companies with 1-3. And then I was at the CP. The CO was a buddy of mine who had gone to amphibious warfare school with me back in the 90s. So I knew him. And so I get settled in there with them. We're going out every day doing patrols. It was hilarious, right? You got 2 lieutenant colonels climbing over walls at houses and going in, kicking doors, clearing houses, making sure there's no insurgents. We're getting in firefights in the middle of the street all the time. You're rolling through Fallujah, and it's just like, there's just death everywhere. You'd see one vehicle with like 6 bodies in it, just completely charred, just black. We're rolling down the street one day, and we see this body, this torso. Well, it had arms and legs, but no head. And as we get closer, we see it's moving, like twitching. Like, how is this possible? This guy, we roll up, he had been a big fat guy, and all the fat is coming out of like where his neck hole was and his shoulders, and it's filling the streets. And as we got closer, we saw there was a dog that was between the guy's leg, like up in his crotch, eating his insides. And that's what was making the body move. So, Fallujah was not a pretty place. And, it was said to be the most dangerous place on earth. It was the worst urban fighting that Marines have seen since the Battle of Hue City in Vietnam. So I had my group of Marines. I had one soldier, a guy who had been a ranger, but he was assigned to 1MEF as a liaison. But he's like, I'm coming with you. The guy was a great gunfighter, crusty guy. And we're outside of a mosque one day where we had been bringing provisions and caring for people. And I'm like, we've been here too long. We need to move or we're going to get ambushed. And sure enough, rounds start coming in. My Iraqi soldiers just scattered, finding cover wherever they could. I got Tim is up in the turret of the Humvee with a Mark 19 that jams. And then, so now he's just up there with an AR, with his M4. That's all he's got. And I've got mine, Dan's got his, Mark's got his, but on the first volley, I think it was an RPG, hit the wall of the mosque near where we were standing. So I got one guy on one side, another guy on the other. They both take shrapnel in their legs. And, we had to medevac one of them. But, so we go through this whole gunfight for like 20 minutes. The enemy is across the street in a building. We finally run them out of there. But during this firefight, so at one point, I'm grabbing a saw. And so I'm standing in the street with a saw. It's probably stupid as hell, right? Because now I'm a big target. And I sensed something behind me. And when I looked, it was one of the Iraqi soldiers had come up behind me, taken his AK, fired 3 rounds, and then ran back for cover between the 2 cars where he was hiding. So we get everybody rounded up, firefight ends, we get everybody out of there. And so we've got to take this one guy, Mark, to a field triage that was set up. It was just a hasty field triage area they put together. And we get him over there, eventually had to take him back to Camp Fallujah. He needed some surgery to get some of the shrapnel out of his legs. But while I'm there, there's a Marine lying there, young kid, right? And he'd been wounded pretty badly. Like young kids just getting shot to shit and blown up. And I go over to check on him, and this Marine had like a wound across his thigh where his thigh was just opened up. You could see his femur. Like it was just meat and femur. And he's like, "Am I gonna be okay, sir?" I said, "Yeah, you're gonna be fine." I said, you got that $1 million wound, right? I said, "You're never gonna see a nickel of that money, but you're gonna be fine." I don't know to this day what happened to that kid, but that takes a toll on you, you know, because you're not much older than my son is now. And, you know, thankfully I didn't have kids or wife back then. I didn't have to worry about going home to a family or not going home to a family. So I was able to be really clear the whole time and do my job and focus on that. But then it strikes you like, wow, these are like America's young men and women who are over here, you know, putting their lives on the line, and something horrible could happen to them. Like, I don't know, the kid could have ended up losing his leg. I don't know what happened to him, but you know, he's scared, rightfully so. And when you see enough of that, it starts to take a toll, of course. So, got pulled out of Fallujah on Thanksgiving Day of 2004. Every day I was proud to be with them. You know, that firefight outside the mosque. One of the Marines with me, he was like a communicator or something. He didn't have any combat experience, no real background other than what they gave him at boot camp and SOI, right? Or, you know, I guess not SOI even. So, but, you know, kid picked up a weapon, got in a fight, engaged the enemy. My buddy Tim was up in the turret, just slinging lead all over the place. And he was a prime target up there with that Mark 19. So, you know, acts of bravery and heroism all the time. One day we chased a Chechen sniper through Fallujah, tried to find him and take him out. He had killed one of the Iraqis. And so it was like people didn't care about themselves, right? And it's what you always hear and talk about is a guy on your left and guy on your right, right? Like, that's why you're fighting. You're not fighting for yourself or for your own life. You're fighting to save them and make sure they go home. And thankfully, you know, everybody that I had with me, that was around me, we all made it out of there. We made it home. That one Iraqi soldier was the only one I knew who ended up dying. You know, I learned a lot of lessons in Fallujah about what motivates people, how you motivate them. Sometimes my techniques may not have been the best, but I felt that it was necessary. You know, the Iraqi soldiers, they must have thought it was a scavenger hunt at times, because I would find them out in the streets with no weapon, but they'd been looting houses where they would try to break into a business that was shuttered to steal whatever they could and take it with them. It was just crazy stuff, and would piss me off, of course, but, you know, were there better ways to handle it rather than just yelling at them? Yeah, probably sometimes there were, but at the same time, I needed to impart on them why we were there and what we were doing. That, you know, none of us is here because we want to be here. We're here because we're trying to secure this city and get rid of people who would kill you for just being a different sect of Islam. And we're trying to make it safe for you and your families. So, you know, you get kind of pissed off when you see them doing things that aren't in line with the mission, that are self-serving. And, you know, we got Americans here. You know, what makes you more important than this American Marine who's with me here, who's fighting in your country? And, you know, of course, looking back on it all now, it's like, it's probably one of the dumbest things we've ever done as a country, was going to Iraq. And, you know, if I was asked to do it again, of course I would. I'd be right there, one of the first people with their hand raised, absolutely. But, you know, that's what you do as a Marine. When I went to Fallujah, linked up with the 1-3 headquarters, they had this puppy in their house. They had found him during a firefight. He was hiding in a 50-gallon oil drum, in the middle of a firefight, and he's barking. So a Marine squad leader told one of his fire team guys, he's like, hey, go take care of that dog, which of course in Marine Corps parlance means kill the fucking thing because he's giving away our position. So the Marine crawls into his drum, pulls the dog out, throws him in his pro gear, takes him back to the house and keeps him. So they got this dog there. And when I got there, I couldn't believe it because General Order 1A, which was promulgated by CENTCOM, says you can't keep pets or care for, any animals, wild or domestic. 1A encompasses a lot of things about alcohol and pornography and all these other things as well. But it was very specific about animals because they do carry diseases, and so if you start getting rabies or leishmaniasis through the force, then now you're a combat ineffective force. So they kept the dog, and I was like, what are you going to do with him? Oh, we're going to take him back to Hawaii. 1-3 is out of Hawaii. I was like, no, you're not. I said, you guys went from Hawaii to Okinawa, you flew there, then you got on ships, you deployed to the Middle East, and you're going to get a dog on a Navy ship, take him back to Okinawa, and then you're going to get him on a flight and fly him to Hawaii that has the most restrictive quarantine regulations anywhere in the United States and some of the most restrictive in the world. It's not going to happen. So I could see how much this dog meant to them, though. And I've always been pretty well connected to people. And so by that I mean I have good connections. I don't necessarily connect with people very well. But so I said, look, let me make some calls back to the States. I'll send some emails. I know some people, and we'll see what we can do. I'll get that dog back to the States for you. And then if you want, you can come to San Diego, come get your dog, and eventually take him back to Hawaii. Roger that. So now, I've just made a big promise to these Marines, and it's important to me to keep my word, right? As a Marine officer, how can I expect a Marine to follow me into a building to engage the enemy if I can't get his dog back to the States for him? So now it becomes kind of a mission within a mission. And I'm probably violating God knows how many regulations by doing this. So when I got pulled out of Fallujah on Thanksgiving Day, I said, okay, I'm going to take the dog back to Camp Fallujah, and then I'll figure out a way to get him to the States from there. So I stick him in my ruck, right? And he's yapping it up in the Humvee on the way back to Camp Fallujah. Now I got to get him into my room on base and keep him quiet there. So I get him back there. I haven't showered in over a month, and all I want to do is get out of my filthy, torn up gear, go take a shower, get cleaned up, actually shave for the first time in a month. And so get in there, I come back, the dog is pissed on my bed, right? So that's first thing he does is piss on my rack. I'm like, damn, I was going to take a nap. So now I've got a week before I'm getting sent to Balad. That's why I got pulled out of Fallujah, was to go up to Balad I was assigned to Task Force 626 up there, which was Special Missions Unit led organization, part of SOCOM, JSOC. And so I'm like, what the hell do I do with the dog? I can't really take him there. So I asked my buddy who I was replacing up in Balad, I said, hey man, you're headed back to the States. I got a package I need you to carry for me. And so we talk about it. And he's like, yeah, I'll do it, but how are we going to work this out? So, I find out he needs all these shots and all this other stuff, so it's not going to happen. So what I did was I managed to take him one day to Baghdad. I went with the commanding general's PSD. They were doing a milk run into Baghdad to get some supplies. So I went with them. We took him to an Air Force vet, got him his shots, and brought him back. And then they had their own spaces. They were in a building by themselves. I'm like, so a couple of those guys had been with me at First Anglico. I'm like, hey, want to hook me up here? Take care of the dog for a while. So I left the dog with them. But in the meantime, I got the Seabees to build him a dog pen, right? So they built a pen for him. They built him a dog house because these Marines were tired of him like shitting in their boots. Like he literally did it. Like he would chew their boots. One guy wakes up one morning, steps onto the little mat next to his bed, steps in dog shit. And so they start calling him shithead instead of lava, and they stick him outside. So 1-3 was called the Lava Dogs. So they just named him Lava Dog, right? So Lava. So that's his name. And so they're watching him, and I'm trying to organize all this shit while I'm first in Balad for a couple months. And then I get pulled out of Balad, brought back, and he's still living there, but now he's like 4 or 5 months old. You know, he's getting pretty big. So I'm like, shit, we got to figure this out pretty quick. So when I was in Fallujah, we had a reporter with us embedded at 1-3. Her name is Ann Garrels from National Public Radio. And Annie's probably seen more combat than 90% of Marines ever will. So she's now in Baghdad reporting on the elections, living in a house in the red zone. And the Marines take lava one day while now I'm out at the Syrian border working with the Iraqi border forces, so the Desert Wolves. And I'm still coordinating all kinds of stuff, trying to get this all working to get lava back to the States. And I'm communicating with Ann, I'm communicating with the States. And finally we work up when the Marines are doing a milk run into Baghdad, they take lava with them and they link up with her at like where the arched swords are in Baghdad. So if you've ever been there, there's a big circle and then the arched swords and a monument to Saddam Hussein or to their military. It's right there in Baghdad. That's where they do the handoff. They give the dog to her. And so Ann takes lava to her house in Baghdad. And now we're trying to coordinate how we're going to get him from Baghdad back to the States. So we find somebody in Jordan who's willing to take him and then get him back to the States. So they put him in a taxi cab in Baghdad and send this cab on like this 6-hour drive from Baghdad out to the Jordanian border. So where I was working there, it was between the Syrian and the Jordanian border. There were two fobs set up. And so I'm down there, this guy shows up, lava's fucking going nuts in the back of this cab, right, in a crate. And so I got to see him for a little bit there. The cab driver was afraid of him. Didn't want to have anything to do with him. And so finally I let him out, fed him, got him some water. He went to the bathroom. You know, he'd been shitting in this crate, and then have to put him back in. And now they're going to go to Jordan. They're going to cross, you know, no man's land, get to the Jordanian border, and then hand him off there. Well, they get stopped and turned around. Guy gets sent back to Baghdad. So now Lava's in his car for like 11, 12 hours. They get back. He ends up back with Ann. And we're like, oh shit, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? So somehow one of her, one of her friends from ABC knew about this and says, hey, you know, we have a connection with Triple Canopy Security where we think we can help you get the dog to the States. So they said, the only thing is we want an exclusive story on it. Yeah, sure, fine, whatever. Just get the dog the fuck out of here. And so, like between the red and the green zone, Ann has to take Lava now, hand him off to somebody from Triple Canopy or ABC, and they get him to triple canopy, and then they take him like in a mad dash to Bayap, to the Baghdad International Airport, to get him there with this load of military working dogs they have that are coming back to the States on leave. And so they get him there, put him in a crate, get him on a plane, fly him to Amman, Jordan, because that's where they were overnighting. So they spend the night in Amman, and one of the guys from Triple Canopy actually stayed in the garage with all the dogs to make sure nobody would come and take him. Because, you know, he's like a 6-month-old dog, puppy, and they got Malinois and Shepherds and all this. So how are you gonna pawn him off? But they did. They kept him safe overnight and then flew him to Chicago and then onward to San Diego. So yeah, he actually made it back to the States in like early April of 2005. So he got picked up by Helen Woodward Animal Center. So a guy from there and a guy from IAM's Pet Foods had been involved. Like all these people got involved in rescuing this fucking mutt from Iraq. But then they brought him up to Helen Woodward Animal Center in Rancho Santa Fe. And that's where I was when he came back. I met him there. And then got Lava the dog. He definitely recognized me as like, he was pissed off at first, like where the fuck you been kind of thing. But then it was a great reunion and a lot of tears were shed.
Wow.
Yeah, got a lot of media coverage right away. We were supposed to be on Good Morning America, and then on like a Monday, and the Pope died on Sunday. So everything got preempted, everything else got kicked aside. But Lava, we eventually did a bunch of media, well, weren't you worried about getting in trouble and all this stuff? He became my dog, so I had him for 11 years. He definitely had some issues. He just could never be settled. He was always hyper alert, hyper reactive. If you look at the list of symptoms for PTSD, he pretty much had them all. He just was very troubled the whole time. He was smart. I could train him. I had a trainer. We had one assigned to us by Helen Woodward. They took care of that at first and did a lot of the basic training with him. He was good. He would heel, sit, stay, lie down, all that stuff, but just always really troubled, just barking for no reason. Like, I think he was hearing things, and he was having flashbacks and just out of control. One thing he did, though, that was pretty cool is I wasn't sleeping very much, and this is like 2007 or so, after I had retired. No, 2008, January of 08, and I wasn't sleeping, so I was in the living room, and I hear him barking one night. It's like 2 a.m. He starts barking. He's at the front door. So I'm like, what the hell? There's nothing going on. So I looked out the front window, and there was this van parked in the middle of our street. We lived on a one-way street in La Jolla, and I'm like, well, this is kind of weird. And then I see a guy come around from the back of the van. He goes over to my wife's car, opens up the back hatch, starts taking stuff. They get back in the van and take off, and I'm like, what the fuck? So I put on a pair of jeans, go running out to my car. I got no shirt, no shoes, no nothing, and get in it, go up the street, turn down the next street, and sure enough, there they are. So I hit them with the high beams, and they took off. So now I'm in a high-speed chase through La Jolla and Bird Rock, chasing these guys in the middle of just like 2 a.m. And so I have the nav system going in my car, and I'm on the phone with 911, telling them what's going on. And so the dispatcher, she's like, sir, you can't be doing this. You shouldn't be chasing them. And, we have to tell you to stop. And I said, I'm not fucking stopping. I said, I'm not Joe Suburbia. said, these guys are stealing shit from me. I'm going to get them. I said, I suggest you send a couple of cars to intercept us. So they did. As we're driving through Bird Rock into Pacific Beach, 2 cruisers are faced the other way. So they whip a U-turn as we go by them. I chase these guys up an alley. They stop. The cops come flying up. So now I'm bailing out of my car, running to grab them. And the cops are out of their cars. And they're yelling at me, get back in your car. You're not the boss of me. So now it's a chase to see who gets to them first. So the cops grab them, cuff them, throw them in their car. Then a bunch of cops showed up. And fortunately, I had a sweater or something in the backseat of my car that I was taking to dry cleaners. So I go grab the sweater, put that on. And now I'm standing there barefoot in the middle of the night talking to the cops and, you know, do the whole thing. They bring them out, shine a spotlight on them. Is that them? Yes. Put them back in the car. So there was a sergeant there, police sergeant. I said, hey, would now be an okay time to go and gloat? And he said, yeah, sure. So I will go up to the cruiser, open up the back door, look at these 2 losers, and I go, neener fucking neener. Close the door, went home. So my wife at the time, my son is like a year old, and she's like, what happened? So I told her the story, and she goes, but what if they come back? They could be in a gang. And I said, look, I was in the baddest gang for 20 years. They aren't coming back. I said, if they were real gangbangers, they are out running prostitutes and selling drugs, not boosting stuff from people's houses in suburbia. So, you know, that all went away. Another time, it was in the summer, and I was getting ready to go do a TV spot down at Fox TV in San Diego. And it's real early in the morning, so houses there in our neighborhood in La Jolla are right on top of one another. And our neighbor had gone away and left her like 17-year-old daughter at home alone with some 23-year-old girl as the adult supervision. Well, sure enough, the night before, there had been a party. So like 2 a.m, I go over there, knock it off. You know, some kid, I don't know, 20 years old or something, now wants us to fight. So the daughter, you know, to her credit, tells this guy, she goes, stop or he will kill you. So the party breaks up, but now I'm walking lava the next morning before we go on TV, and, you know, I'm in a suit, and then he goes flying back down the street. I was walking him off leash, and he runs up the neighbor's driveway, and there's somebody in the driveway. I get down there, daughter and this other gal, the guy tried to break in the house, da-da-da-da-da. So I approached him, he, of course, tried to bolt. So I took him down, I just go knee on belly on him in the driveway. I'm holding him down by the throat. And I told her, I said, okay, call the police. So I look at the guy, he's a young kid, like 18, 19 years old. I go, what am I gonna do with you? I said, maybe I should just take you down to MCRD San Diego and put you on the yellow footprints. And I've got my hand on his throat, and he just looks at me and goes, maybe you should. So he ends up getting arrested. I go on TV, and of course that has to make the news too, right? It's like, I can't get away from this shit. And you can't make this up, right? It's like, how does this happen? But it's all because Lava was like so hyper alert and hyper aware that he was sensing these things and putting me onto it. But yeah, he had some big time issues. And finally in 2016, I was living downtown. I was separated from my wife. I was in a high rise next to Petco Park, and I come home, and he had been in my bedroom. He had chewed the door almost all the way through. He had chewed a wall, like down to the studs. There were nails all over the floor. Like his mouth was all bloody. He had chewed up a suitcase. I was getting ready to go. I guess I had just come back from a trip. And I was getting ready to start cancer treatment for prostate cancer. So I called the vet, who's still my vet, like all these years later. He's been my vet for almost 20 years. And I told him what was going on, and he goes, "You've given that dog 8 years longer than anybody else ever would have put up with." He said, "It's just time." He said, he's never going to be happy. And so January 6th or so of 2016, I had to take him in, and we put him down. And then right after that, I had to go and do my first cancer treatment. So, which isn't fun either. For prostate cancer, I did proton radiation, and they have to shove this balloon up your ass, but it's a stick that then has a hose attachment on it, and then they inflate it with water so it separates different organs away from the prostate. So it's the only thing that they make 100% sure the radiation's only hitting that. So you go through that like 30 times. So that was the day I put lava down, was the first time I had something shoved up my ass like that. There are definitely things that you see that I haven't talked about here, things you do, that if you're not a sociopath to begin with, have a big impact on how you view the world, how you view life. When we got back from Iraq in 2005, I became the deputy director for advisor training at Camp Pendleton, and the deputy commanding general for 1MEF, Denny Halick, had been selected to stand up MARSOC. So I had a good relationship with Denny, some fun times with him in Iraq. When I was back at Camp Fallujah at one point, we had a very good relationship. I have a lot of respect for him. And I think he trusted that what I would tell him was always the truth and not what I thought he wanted to hear. One time I was on base, coming in just from being out in the city, and my trousers are unbloused. I got my sleeves rolled up a quarter of the way up my arms. Got big fuzzy mustache going, and I walked by his office and said, "Hey, how's it going, sir?" And he's like, "Just working my ass off, Jay." And, he's at his computer. I said, "I don't know, sir. It looks like you're sitting on your ass working your fingers off." He's like, "Steady, Colonel." So another time in the chow hall there, the power went out at night and it gets dark. I'm like, screw this. I'm out of here. So as I walk out, I walk by the table where he and the CG are sitting, and it's the two of them and the sergeant major. And I walk by and I said, "Good evening, gentlemen." And Halick, he just goes, "So what, Jay? No fuck you, General, tonight?" I'm like, okay, now what do I do? Now I've been challenged here. I got to say something, right? "With all due respect, fuck you, generals." And so the CG, without skipping a beat, he just goes, "Jay, many in Article 32 has begun with the words 'with all due respect.'" So for people that may not know, in Article 32 is what you do when you're thinking about an investigation into misconduct. So, yeah, so we had that kind of relationship. And as I was getting close to retirement time, it was like 2006, Denny's getting assigned to stand up MARSOC, and he invited me to go with him to start MARSOC. So I think I had met the gal that was eventually going to become my wife. So this is probably early 2006, maybe late 2005. And I said, "Can I have a day to think about this?" And he said, "Absolutely." So I thought about it. I said, "You know what, I think I'm done." I said, "What would I do at MARSOC?" Maybe I'd get promoted one more time, but I'd end up being chief of staff. I probably wasn't going to be leading troops anymore. I wasn't going to have quote unquote fun. And so I went back to him the next day. I said, "Respectfully, I can't thank you enough for thinking of me for this role, whatever it was going to be, and for the honor, but I'm going to retire. He said, I understand and wish you nothing but the best. So I ended up leaving active duty probably October of 2006. My first book had just come out, was doing really well. It became a New York Times bestseller. It's called From Baghdad with Love, and it's about my time in Fallujah, finding lava, the whole story of getting back to the States and everything that went on around there. So my time with Task Force 626, and my time out at the Syrian and Jordanian borders. So, but mostly really the story is about finding him and everything that went into getting him back to the States. So there's definitely some war stories in there, but really the book is about that. So that was doing really well. I had been picked up by a speakers bureau. I was, getting paid a lot of money to go around and just talk to different organizations and businesses. So I wasn't really working. And I think that when that happens, when you don't have something every day to do, you can get lost. You're already away from your unit, from all the camaraderie that you've experienced for 20 years. It's all gone. 21 years, it's gone. Like that. Like one day you're a Marine surrounded by all your brothers, and then the next it's over. And I don't think people, even if it's 4 years or 6 years, I don't think we prepare properly to integrate into society and to be part of society unless you have taken steps beforehand. So I was really lost. I was eventually diagnosed with traumatic brain injury, PTSD, and I was angry. I was just not, who the fuck chases people down the streets of their community just because they took a diaper bag out of their car, right? And that's what those guys ended up stealing, was a diaper bag. But I had a lot of anger, a lot of frustration. I was lost. I didn't know really what I was going to do. I was on book tour in Brazil because it had become like the #2 bestseller in Brazil. So the publisher there flew me down for 10 days. I got a call from my agent that a publisher wanted me to write a second book. So I ended up writing a second book about reintegration, post-military career, the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder, the treatments available, how it impacts veterans, how it impacts their families. But in the meantime, I wasn't doing anything to take care of myself. And part of the problem with this is that you don't know what you don't know, right? You think you're fine, and you think everybody around you is fucked up. But really, you're the one that's fucked up, and everybody around you is looking at you like you got a dick growing out of your head because you may as well. I was an asshole. There's no doubt about it. No question. I was a complete and utter asshole. I would get pissed off at things for no reason. For some reason, I had very nosy neighbors who felt they needed to insert themselves in things. My son was, maybe 3, 4. He was old enough to take a garbage bag out of the house and put it in a trash can. So asked him to take the garbage. Starts pitching a fit. Maybe he was like 6 or 7. And so my mother-in-law was at the house. My wife was at the house. My stepson was there. Everybody's there. So my son takes the bag of garbage, goes out of the house, and he's pitching a fit. So I went out with him, and I was going to help him, but he decides to take this bag of garbage, open the garbage can, one of those big black ones, takes the bag and slams it in. Well, when he did, he slammed his arm on the lip of the can, and it's pretty solid. So now he runs in the house crying and screaming. So like a couple days later, getting calls from Child Protective Services. And somebody had reported that I was chasing my son. He's running naked down the street, screaming, no, 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 and I'm chasing him. So they do this big investigation, and they send this gal to our house to interview both of us separately. So she interviews me first, and I was a dick. And I had her come in and sit down, and I stood over her to show dominance. And I said, let me ask you a question. Do I look like a stupid person to you? She didn't know what to say. And I said, it's a simple yes or no question. Do I look like a stupid person? Because only a stupid person would do something that asinine to where he would risk the loss of custody of his child. So I ask you again, do I look stupid to you? Well, no. I said, so then why the fuck are you here? Well, we have to come when it gets reported. So they do this whole thing, ask me all these questions. I had neighbors who came over who spoke on my behalf. And then, but without me in the room, they could say whatever they wanted. And then she interviews my wife. And after it's all over, this is to the point of I'm an asshole. My wife says to me, she goes, did they ask you about firearms in the house? I said, no. Why? Did they ask you? She goes, yeah. I said, so what did you tell them? She goes, well, I don't know if we have any. I said, well, what do you think is in the fucking safe every time you go get your passport to go on one of your fucking trips? I said, those aren't cigarette lighters in there. I said, so you either are the dumbest human being I've ever met, or you just lied to Child Protective Services. And now I'm at risk of not having custody of my son anymore. So this went on for a couple of days. And finally, I was watching TV one Saturday night, watching UFC or something. She's like, you have to leave. I said, what are you talking about? She said, I can't live like this anymore. I can't live with your anger and the way you berate me and yell at me. You have to go. And so I just threw some shit in a backpack and got out. And it was pretty low time. I wasn't working. I had been working at Johnson & Johnson for a couple of years after grad school. And now I'm unemployed. I'm unhoused and angry, right? But still not being able to connect the dots. So I had started at the VA at that point. Like, they were medicating me. I was taking an SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, that would supposedly kind of help to level me out. But for 7 years after I got back from Iraq, I slept 3 hours a night. That was it. I mean, I didn't sleep. And so that's super unhealthy. It just makes you even crankier and more pissed off all the time. You can function, you can get through the day, but you're not a good person when you're doing it. So after we separated, I started going to therapy at the VA. While I was writing my second book, the publisher said, well, if you're going to write about it, you better experience it. So I go to the VA and they have me start seeing this woman there who I just referred to in my second book. I call her Dr. Freud. And every appointment was the same. I'd go in and she'd say, so how was your week? How are things with you and your wife? And this was before we were separated. And it was the same fucking routine every day. There was no deep dive into root causes or anything else. And so finally, one day I went in there and I sat down. Before she could say anything, I said to her, so how was your week? How are things with you and your husband? And she got pissed off, of course. And I got pissed off and I left and I never went back. But then after we separated, I went back to the VA. They gave me another therapist who I saw there for about a year. And then she was great, really good, like easy to talk to. She's the one that helped me see through what was really going on. And we dug down and we got back to childhood trauma, shit I had blocked for my entire life. And, you know, at that point I was like, so you mean I don't have to talk to my mom anymore? She said, just because somebody's family doesn't mean you have to talk to them. If it's a relationship that's painful for you, that's hurtful for you, you don't have to talk to them. And this was right about the time I was diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2015. And so it was like a light went on for me. And I went religiously every week to therapy with her for 2 years. She left the VA and went out on her own, but the VA kept paying for me to see her for a while. And then I paid for it on my own. And it was helping, but I was still on the meds. You know, I was taking citalopram and I was taking something else for sleep. So, which isn't ideal because I was drinking. You know, I didn't stop doing that. And I was just a shithead. You know, I didn't recognize my son for the person he is. You know, as a father, I was thinking, well, my son should be just like me, right? He should do all the things I like to do. He should be interested in the things I like. So it made it difficult for me to fully embrace him and see him as my son, as, you know, as this wonderful person. So I struggled for a really long time. I thought I was getting better, and in some ways I was, but it just, you're not right. I mean, when you walk around and you have to walk around armed all the time, you can't be in crowds. I mean, I had it all. I had it all. I mean, to this day, I'm probably still hypervigilant, right? I can't sit with my back to a door, you know, big crowds, depending on the setting. They're okay, but I struggled for a long, long time with my anger. My son didn't want to be with me. His mother didn't, you know, she didn't make him be with me. So that relationship got strained. And in 2020, during COVID, I finally had enough. You know, my son wasn't wanting to be with me. I talked to him and his mom. He was 13. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna move to Idaho, to a small area called Swan Valley. My best friend was living there. I'd been going up there fly fishing and hunting for years, and I just needed to get out of California and San Diego. So I went up there. I stayed there for almost 2 years. I was still doing therapy over the phone with this therapist when I felt I needed it. In the meantime, I got off the SSRI and the sleep meds. I quit taking those, but I still had to medicate somehow. So kept drinking. At night I would use weed to help me sleep. But I was out in nature more. I was fly fishing, hunting, skiing, coming back to San Diego every month to see my son. I would drive 14 hours each way to come see him. Doesn't make me Father of the Year by any stretch, but it's what I could do at the time. It was better for me to be there. It was better for my mental health and made me better around him when I would be here than if I had stayed and just been pissed off being in California. So there were some hard times, but ultimately, in summer of 22, he told his mom he wanted me to come back. So I said, okay, I'm coming back. By that point, I had started microdosing, And so I felt like that was helping quite a bit, every other day or every day. Psilocybin, I was still using THC to sleep at night, and smoking weed on occasion. And while I was in Idaho, I had a buddy who'd been a SEAL for 30 years who told me about psychedelics and doing a psychedelics retreat. He said he went and did it. He did a medicine called ibogaine, which comes from the iboga plant in equatorial Africa. And then they also did a second medicine called 5-MeO-DMT that comes from the Sonoran desert toad, where they secrete it, take the secretion, put it on a slide, it crystallizes, they can scrape it, and then you can smoke it. And these are all dosed based on weight. So he introduced me to the physician who runs this program, and in 2023, I was talking to a gal at an organization called Boot Campaign. I was making a recommendation for a buddy of mine to become a personal trainer for veterans who were part of the Boot Campaign program. And so she asked me, well, tell me a little bit about your story. What's up with you? And I told Jenny about my time in the military, and we somehow got on the topic of psychedelics, and she said, well, I'm going to get you a scholarship to go do the medicine. So I was scheduled to go in January of 2024, January 5th, down to Mexico to do this retreat. And I was training for the No-Gi Worlds in Jiu-Jitsu they were in December of last year. And a few weeks before I was supposed to compete, I was rolling with one of our 320-pound black belts, and he ended up moving in such a way it tore 2 ligaments and a meniscus in my right knee. So I had just come back from Master Worlds at the end of August, beginning of September. I got silver at Worlds last year. I was going to go win No-Gi Worlds, and then I was going to go and do this retreat. But now I can't go in January, so they postponed it till March. And in March, on March 15th, was a week before my retreat. And so they tell you, they give you a clean diet to eat for that week. You got to cut out alcohol, drugs, whatever else, certain supplements, you can't take them. And the organization I went and did this with was Mission Within. Their founder is a physician. He had a rehab center down in TJ where he was treating heroin addicts, meth addicts, using this medicine called ibogaine to get rid of their addiction. And at one point he had a SEAL or a Marine came through who was a heroin addict, and he treated him for the heroin addiction, but also after the treatment, he found out the guy's PTSD was gone. And ibogaine it can be a one shot, one kill treatment. You don't have to do it a bunch of times. It's not addictive by any stretch. I mean, it's a tough journey. And so, it can be a one and done, no problem. It has these special neuroplasticity properties that rewire your brain. So it's like after you've experienced it, it's like wiping your hard drive and starting fresh on your computer. So you start with a clean slate. So you don't drink or use drugs for a week before you go. And so now I've been sober for 178 days since I started this journey. Went down with my cohort. There were 6 of us total. We went down to Mexico. We get down there on a Friday, late Friday morning, get into a house that is just, it's an awesome place. It's got ocean views. You know, it's across the highway from the beach, just north of Rosarito, down in Baja, overlooks a valley. The energy, as soon as you walk in the house, you just feel acceptance and unconditional love, like nothing I've ever experienced. So that day you spend getting to know one another, you're telling your stories. There's an area they have set up where they have like 2 sofas facing each other, then 4 chairs. So everybody could sit there, and we have these share circles and talk about experiences, have something to eat. And then that night, we do the ibogaine journey. It's all very ceremonial. It's very safe. There are physicians there. There's a cardiologist there. You've got nurses, helpers. All 6 of us stayed in one room the whole time. It's this big room, and they set up beds on the floor for us. And that night we did the ibogaine. They give you 2 capsules. It's all based on your weight. You write down on a piece of paper the things you want the medicine to take from you, that you want to leave behind, the crap. And then you write on a card your intentions, what you want it to give you. So you take that piece of paper before you go upstairs. You take that paper and you burn it, and then everybody places their card in a bowl. It had sand and, you know, Palo Santo and sage. You put your card in there and you leave it. And you could bring mementos with you too. Like I took some fur from my last dog who had died the year before. He was an all-black German Shepherd, Gunny. I've got his name tattooed on my arm. So I took some of his fur. I took a photo of my father, my son, and me. And then, you know, it's a really cool ceremony. You take your ibogaine, and then one at a time we went upstairs. One of the gals on the retreat is there. She sends you up. And then the guy who was the ops manager for our retreat, also a Marine, he smudges everybody with Palo Santo. You go in, put on an eye mask, Bluetooth headphones, so you're listening to music, and the room is completely darkened, except they have lights on the ceiling to make it look like stars, and this music is playing, and you lie back and you wait for the medicine to take effect, and it takes about 30 minutes. Everybody's journey is different. One of my cohort there had been deployed for 2,555 days. This guy was deployed for 8 years of his life, either in the Army or as a contractor. And for 12 hours, his visions were just dead people. You know, another guy was doing combat with a 600-foot tall giant that was just throwing him against walls. And, you know, some guys had horrible experiences. Mine was really, in a way, kind of beautiful. There's a lot of symbolism in these journeys. You know, it took me months even to figure out what it was showing me. So some of it was like kind of obvious to me, but some of it took me a long time to figure out, like, and it wasn't like just sitting there, oh, that's what it means. It's when I would be talking to people, relating my experience, that I would realize that's what that meant. So, like for me, I was lying there, and then all of a sudden, it's like I was lying in a canyon, right? Just looking up at the sky. And then all of a sudden, the sky just opened up, like a trap door fell, and stuff just starts coming at me, right? Images. Like my father, my dog, who was there the whole time, kind of is my guide, I guess. And then, you know, I see my best friend, And then my son, like, it was at various stages of his life. And this went on for 12 hours. This is a 12-hour trip. So, but like he'd be in his mom's car in the car seat as like a 2-year-old. And they'd get closer, and then right when I'd be able to see him, he'd have a clown mask on. I'm like, what the fuck is with the clown mask? And this happened the whole time. Every time I saw him, he's wearing a clown mask. And there was a merry-go-round. And I'm like, why is there a merry-go-round? I don't get this. At various times, my bed, and the weird thing is, you're wearing this black eye mask, you could see through it. I could see through the fucking mask. So you were aware, but what you were seeing wasn't always necessarily there. Like I would think somebody would be right next to my bed, and I'd reach up to touch them, and they weren't there. It was some bizarre shit, but my bed, I felt it 3 times during the night. It just levitated. And this room had like a 15-foot ceiling. I felt myself levitate on the mattress, fly across the room, and I could see the guys in the room on their mattresses. I'm like, shit, I'm gonna crash down right on this guy, right on Patrick. I'm gonna land on him. And then it would go through the wall with me on it, and then come back into the room and settle down. And this happened 3 times. And I was like, what the fuck? So I took that to mean that whatever you've got going on in your life, there are no barriers. Whatever you want to do, you can do. If you want to get better, you can get better, but you have to make it happen. And that's what going through that wall meant to me. And then some of the other shit I just couldn't figure out. Like the merry-go-round thing, it was a few weeks later, I was talking to a friend who's done psychedelics, and I was telling her about it, and then it hit me. It was like, the fucking merry-go-round is, you've been doing the same shit your entire life, and where has that got you? You haven't changed. You're still an asshole. How about get off this ride and do something different? Okay, I get it. The clown mask thing, I couldn't figure out for the longest time. And I was back in San Diego in mid-July. I went to Idaho at the end of June for the summer. That's where my primary residence is. I still spend a lot of time up there. And so I went up there, came back in July to do another podcast. I'm in San Diego, and after the podcast, I was going up to Del Mar to meet a guy from a big foundation to talk about the mission within, because I'm very involved with them. And it hit me what the clown mask thing was all about. And it was the medicine telling me that I wasn't seeing my son for the person he is. It's like, that makes a lot of fucking sense now. Like, but it's life-changing. Like, it's awesome, but it's a gut punch too at the same time, that I've been trying to make my son somebody he's not, when he's perfect, just the way he is. And if I had just accepted that years ago, it would have been completely different. Things would be different. So, did the Ibogaine 12 hours. I mean, it was fucking crazy. And like the guy who was the ops manager for the weekend finally comes up in the bedroom. It's the next morning at like 11:30, and I'm the only one up there. Everybody else had gone downstairs already, because it takes some time, like, to get it out of your system. Like, you don't do anything Saturday. They call it grade A. And he's like, hey, man, are you all right? I said, yeah, I feel really good. I go, but I think I fucked something up. And he goes, what do you mean? I go, my Ibogaine journey, it wasn't all dark, and like there was no there was no hate or anything in it, like no death and destruction like I thought I would see. I thought it'd be all combat stuff coming back and purging that, because you do purge, like ibogaine and ayahuasca, these medicines, they make you purge. I got dry heaves like 4 times. And I was telling him about it. I said, yeah, the only dark thing was this, you know, this undertaker kind of guy wearing the big black hat and the cloak, and he would come at me with an axe. But even that wasn't scary. It was, to me, it was like, he's here to cut away the old so there can be new growth, right? Like, it's like forestry. You got to cut away the old growth so that new trees can grow. And I told him all about it, the things I saw, and I said, yeah, I think it's screwed up. He goes, no, that's perfect. Because what they say is the medicine will show you what you need. It gives you what you need, that you do it when you're supposed to do it. Like, if you try to force it and expect an outcome from it, it doesn't go the way you think it's going to. It never does. And then people are disappointed. So Sunday, we do another medicine called 5-MeO-DMT. And it is the most powerful hallucinogenic medicine on the planet. It comes from the Sonoran Desert toad. I did it. I was the last person to go. We didn't do it in a group. Everybody does it individually. So we started at like 8:30 in the morning. Finally, by like 3:30 in the afternoon was my time to go. So I go down. They have this special room for it. It's got glass windows. It's like a mini garage, but with glass roll-up doors, but they have it all set up for this ceremony. There's a bed made up. The shaman is there, and she's just the most wonderful person I've ever met. And then the ops manager, and they're holding space for you. So the 5, or the toad as it's called, you smoke it, and it takes about 20 seconds to inhale the full dose. And once you do, they put another eye mask on you. There's music playing. You know, you've been looking out at this beautiful setting. The shaman counts backward from 10. They lay you back on a pillow. But before she even gets to 1, you're like in the medicine. And again, everybody has different experience with this medicine. My first dose, I didn't really have any visions, but I just wanted to curl up. And I did. I just lay there with my hands on my heart, and I cried. But it was like I could physically feel like anger, guilt, self-hate just leaving my body. It was gone. Like, I felt lighter. It was just relief, and just this feeling of unconditional love coming over me. So if you wanted a second or third dose, they told us that day, you know, you make the baby sign for more, right? The hand sign for more. So like, I come out of that, I sit up, and I'm like this, right? I wanted more. And so give me a minute, do the second dose, I lie back, and like my body, I had no control over anything at this point, nothing. Like, my body just went rigid. My arms went straight out to the sides, completely stiff. My legs straight out, completely stiff. My back is arching off the mattress. And now I'm having these visions, but all it is like these lines, like lightning bolts in fluorescent yellows and greens against a black backdrop. And they're coming into my body, exiting my body, exiting my mouth, and I'm just lying there going, "Ah!" like that the whole time. And but I'm feeling different things. I'm feeling different sensations. And there's one point I could have sworn I died, that I crossed over for sure. It was just this craziest thing, and it didn't seem like it lasted very long, but it was like I was in another plane entirely. I was not of this world anymore. And it like sucked me back. And finally this ended. But I'm lying there, I'm shaking. And I looked at Cam and I'm like, bro, I want more, but I don't think I can. He's like, no, you're done. And so I looked at Myra and she was holding my hand and I said to her, I go, did I die? And she goes, no, you just lived. So I just told them both I loved them. Yeah, I laid there crying for a while, but it felt so good. Just to have it all gone. You know, carried all that anger and self-hate for all those fucking years, and you don't know, right? You don't know until it's gone. And so we get finished and it's like, go have something, make me something to eat. Like there was one gal on the retreat who cooked for us the whole time. It was all very clean, awesome food, just so good for you and good tasting. And it's like what I was eating tasted better than anything I'd eaten before. And it's like the sky is a more brilliant blue, right? Like I say that even my jujitsu has gotten better because I don't have these blockages now, right? I can like focus, I can see things. You know, I have this clarity that I never had before. So we're driving back on Monday, we come back, cross the border, and I'm texting my son, you know, because now he's 17. And I was telling him, yeah, we're back. He was getting ready to fly to Costa Rica with his mom that morning for like 10 days. So I wasn't going to see him. And I said, he goes, oh, how was it? I said, it was amazing. I said, I can't wait to tell you all about it. I think you're going to really like the new me. And being a smart-ass 17-year-old, he writes, you didn't turn into a woman, did you? So they went away and came back, and he came over for dinner. And I said, so you want to hear about the retreat? And he's like, yeah, for sure. So I told him all about it. And at the end, I said, you know, I'm really sorry for being such a shit dad for all these years and being a really crappy husband to your mom. He's like, no, it's okay, I love you. And I said, no, it's not okay. I said, I wish I'd had this 20 years ago. And he goes, nah, then I'd have just been raised like a sissy. So I said, no. I said, I'm just as capable of violence as I ever was, but now I know it's not the way I have to be. So, you know, unfortunately for us, you know, especially if you're in combat, you have to project this image of being hard, right? But that's not being hard. Being hard is when you can do all that shit and still be a person. That's being a hard person. Like now, like I know what I am on the inside, right? I'm still that hard guy, but I look at things completely differently through a different lens now. And this probably saved my life. I know it saved my relationship with my son. It's much better now. You know, even his mother has said to me that she's seen a difference in his behavior, and that was only a couple weeks after I went. You know, when I saw him again the first time at the end of the summer, I hadn't seen him all summer because I was in Idaho, and then he and his mom went to Europe for like 12 days, and then she has a family place in northern Idaho that he was going to. So I told him about the clown mask and what that was, and I apologized again. But, you know, I think, you know, it's a lot easier now for me to tell somebody I love them. And my closest friends, when we talk on the phone, I always tell them I love them now. It's really important because life is super short. You know, it's like dealing with a second cancer now. I have a form of leukemia that caused my spleen to get really huge, so I can't train jujitsu. Which is frustrating for me. Super frustrating. It was pretty much all I ever did in San Diego, was train jujitsu 5 days a week. But you learn to adapt, and I give people more grace now. Try to give myself some grace too, which is really important, that we don't do that enough. We don't say to ourselves, it's okay. Things are gonna be okay. You know, we struggle a lot with trauma. And going with the mission within really saved me. I've always felt a sense of service, whether it's the military or in the work that I do. After grad school, I worked in healthcare. I now work for Simplifying America's Fund as a business advisor for veteran entrepreneurs. I continue to give back, right? You know, we do great things there. It's a wonderful organization. I think it's important that everybody find some way to be of service at some point in their life. But the mission within was just super profound for me, that what they're doing can save lives. So a couple weeks after my retreat down there in Mexico, I was with friends of mine at their place in La Jolla. We were going out to dinner, and I talked to them about my experience. And it was very raw and emotional for me. As you can see, it still is. But after I told them the story, I asked them, I said to them, I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm going to ask you to consider donating to this organization so that we can treat Marines, because that's who they support. They support Marines and they support dogs. So the two things I love the most, Marines and dogs. And so they said, okay, we're going to give it some serious thought, because they had seen such a profound change in me that they thought there must be something here. And 8 days later, their family foundation had a board meeting. And the next day, I got an email saying they were going to commit $1 million from their family foundation to fund Marines to go through this therapy, to go on these retreats. So it's like, it's unbelievable what we're doing, what the mission within is doing to save lives. We just had our first retreat of Marines only. And I met them when they came back from Mexico on just this past Monday on Labor Day. And it was like, it was unbelievable to see the joy that these guys have now. And it's especially powerful when you know their backstories. But it's almost kind of a goofy look on their faces, but you can feel the energy that they have too. You know, they're just more open, and they're more able to receive and give love, and their lives are now forever changed. They have to put in the work afterward, because it's not, you know, it's not a panacea. There's no magic pill. There is work that has to be done to really heal yourself. But if you do that, your life is so much better. I mean, I'm sober. I feel better than I ever have. I don't let shit piss me off the way I used to. And it does have the second and third order effects. So I had taken my son in June to the DMV to get his learner's permit. And because I have an Idaho driver's license, I needed something to show residency in California too. So I had my utility bills on my phone, and they said, no, it has to be paper. So now we've driven up to Vista in traffic, and they're saying he can't do it. So I felt like shit for him, and I wanted to get pissed off, but then I thought, you know what? This woman only works here. I'm going to show her some grace. She doesn't make the rules. And we walked out. I said to him, I go, I'm really sorry. He goes, it's okay. I said, no. I said, I'm sorry. I'm your father, and I've let you down. He said, no, Dad, it's okay. He said, now we just have more time to do something that's more meaningful to me. And it's like, it's just a beautiful moment that a year earlier or 6 months earlier, I'd have been cursing in the DMV and slamming doors, and then he'd have been upset. But at the end of the day, we had a great time together. Went and got tacos and hung out, and it was wonderful, and it wouldn't have happened without having gone and done this psychedelic assisted therapy. There's just no way. Books are available, of course, on Amazon, wherever books are sold, right? So From Baghdad with Love is the first one. From Baghdad to America is the second one. My Instagram is J_Kopelman_USA. And I'm on Facebook too, except I don't remember what that is. Might be the same thing. And yeah, so Simplifying America's Fun, you can find it at the Fund. It's thefund.org is the website. You know, they've been around for 20 years. In May was the 20th anniversary. Started as just a grassroots effort by a couple of Marine wives, and it's still going strong. In 2023, we provided $29.5 million of assistance to veterans and their families. Yeah, through all kinds of different programs. You know, we have Team Simplify, which is outdoors and sports. We have the apprenticeship program where I work as an advisor for veteran entrepreneurs. And there are other layers of that. So if somebody's, a wounded or injured veteran and meets the requirements of the fund, they can apply to the fund. Just go to the website, apply to become part of the fund. And if you've got a business or a hobby that you're interested in growing and developing, you talk to a case manager and they refer them over to our team to become part of the apprenticeship program. So we have lots of great advisors. I have a good business background. And like I said, I do have lots of great connections that have helped these guys and gals out with their businesses. It's fun to see them launch and become successful and go out on their own and do really well. And then the Mission Within is missionwithin.org. I'm on their board. I came in as their board president right after I raised the money. And I get involved with them quite a bit. So it's definitely, in Japanese, the word is ikigai, which is kind of your life's purpose. It's definitely my ikigai to bring this amazing healing therapy to as many veterans and first responders as who want it, right? And so, yeah, raising money all the time for that, to be able to provide scholarships to people who want to take advantage of this amazing opportunity. I hope that, my experience can provide something for somebody out there. If it helps one person, then I feel like I've done something. You know, they say if you get 1% better every day yourself, that's good. If you help one person every day, to me, that's a miracle. You know, I'm just an old guy trying to do good by others every single day. Just a regular dude. I'm nobody special. I've just had good fortune for a lot of my life to be in the right place at the right time and have some things work out really well for me. Of course, we're all faced with setbacks too. You know, I'm dealing with my second cancer now, but it doesn't mean that life has to stop. Don't let what you perceive to be an obstacle stop you from doing something that you're really passionate about. You know, I trained jiu-jitsu 5 days a week with this disease until it got to the point where my doctors said I couldn't. Competed at the highest levels. And so there's nothing standing in anybody's way. There's nothing you can't do if you set your mind to it. And if you set the right intentions for your actions, good things are going to come to you. So don't ever give up, man. It's like life's a grind, but it can be beautiful too if you go ahead and take it head on and do the things you're really passionate about doing.